Ever wish you could, like, read minds?
Mhm.
Not just, like, guess what someone's thinking,
Right.
but actually know.
Yeah.
It's got to be one of those fantasies everyone's had.
Oh, for sure.
Like, wouldn't that be amazing?
Totally.
So today we're doing a deep dive on The Art of Reading Minds by Henrik Fexeus.
Okay.
To find out if there's anything to it.
Yeah.
Or if it's all just, fantasy.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Is there really such a thing as mind reading?
Well, you might be surprised to learn. It's more real than you might expect, but not in the way you might think. You can forget about like crystal balls and mind control. It's really about understanding how people subtly reveal their thoughts through their behavior.
Okay, so less like Professor X and more like
Yeah.
everyday Sherlock Holmes then.
Exactly. Fexeus' argument is that what we call mind reading is really just heightened observation. We all do it unconsciously, but he just gives us the tools to do it deliberately.
So what's the secret then? Is there like some mind-reading Rosetta Stone out there I've been missing?
Well, it's not really about a single secret. It's more about recognizing a whole system of cues. And it's interesting. Fexeus connects this with the work of the philosopher René Descartes.
Descartes. As in, I think, therefore I am Descartes.
What does philosophy have to do with any of this?
Well, Descartes thought that the mind and body were completely separate. And Fexeus is saying that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how we leak information. You know when you get nervous and your heart starts to race?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Or when you clench your jaw when you're angry?
Oh, yeah, all the time, especially in traffic. Our bodies are constantly reacting to our thoughts.
That's true. I never really thought about it like that before. But how does that translate into actually reading someone's mind?
Well, it's about learning the language of those physical reactions, even the really subtle ones, like a slight shift in posture or a change in breathing.
Okay.
Even those super quick micro expressions that we see, they all tell a story if you know how to read them.
Micro-expressions. You're talking about those really fast facial expressions, right? The ones that most people don't even notice.
Exactly. They happen so fast that most people miss them. But they can be really revealing.
Huh, interesting. How much can you really tell from something like a quick facial expression?
You can tell more than you might think. Imagine someone saying, "Oh, I'm fine," with like a totally neutral tone. But then like for a split second, you see a flash of anger in their eyes. That's a microexpression. And it betrays their true feelings, even if they're trying to hide them.
Wow, that's kind of creepy when you think about it. Like our faces are betraying us.
Yeah, it's like our faces have a mind of their own.
So how do you even spot these things? I feel like you'd need to carry around a high-speed camera or something.
You don't need any special equipment, just a keen eye and some practice. And that's what's so cool about Fexeus' approach. He takes these complex concepts like microexpressions and body language, even the words that people use, and he breaks them down into practical tools that anyone can learn.
So no need to be some kind of psychic detective, just a more observant person.
Exactly.
I like it. This is already making me look at people differently. Okay, so we've established that our bodies betray our thoughts. But where do we even begin to decode all of this information?
Yeah.
Where are like the fundamental building blocks of mind reading?
Well, he starts with rapport, which he brilliantly compares to like assembling IKEA furniture.
Okay, hold on. IKEA furniture,
Yeah.
I can barely put that stuff together with instructions, right?
And that's his point, exactly. Like building a bookshelf, building rapport might seem complicated. But with the right instructions, anyone can do it. It's about understanding how to connect with someone on a deeper level. Creating a foundation of trust where you can really start to listen to what their nonverbal cues are telling you.
I like that, building that bridge to understanding.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I got to say this IKEA furniture analogy has me intrigued. So how do we actually assemble rapport with someone? What are the instructions?
Well, Fexeus breaks it down into a few key techniques. One of the most powerful being mirroring and matching. And this doesn't mean just like copying someone's every move, which would be kind of creepy.
Yeah, for sure.
It's more about subtly reflecting their body language, their tone of voice, even their breathing rhythm.
Okay, so like if they're leaning forward, I should lean forward too.
Exactly. It seems like a small thing.
Oh, you go.
But these little cues create an unconscious sense of connections. It's like you're saying we're on the same wavelengths here without actually saying it.
That's pretty cool. So it's all about creating that sense of trust and understanding without even saying a word.
Exactly. And Fexeus actually has another point about building rapport that I thought was interesting. He says that agreeing with someone's opinions, even if you disagree later on, can be a really effective way to build rapport.
Wait, really? You mean even if someone says something I think is totally wrong, like pineapple on pizza wrong?
Right. Well, you don't have to agree with everything, of course. But finding some small point of common ground, even if it's something small, it helps build that initial connection. It shows that you're listening to them and that you're trying to understand their perspective. And
Well,
then you can always respectfully share your own views later on.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like you're building a bridge,
Exactly.
and that initial agreement is the first stepping stone.
Right.
I like it. So once you've established rapport, then you're in a better position to actually start reading their nonverbal cues more accurately. That makes sense. So we've talked about mirroring and matching and agreeing with opinions as ways to build rapport, but Fexeus doesn't just talk about general body language, right? I remember reading something about how people's senses can actually play a role in how they think.
Absolutely. He has this whole fascinating concept of sensory preferences, where he argues that we all have a dominant sense, like visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, that shapes how we perceive and process information.
So you're saying some people think in pictures,
Yeah.
while others think in sounds or feelings.
Exactly. For example, a visual person might say something like, I see what you mean,
Right.
while an auditory person might say, that sounds about right.
Okay.
And a kinesthetic person might talk about how something feels right or wrong.
Yeah. That's so true. I can think of so many people in my life who fit those descriptions perfectly. So how does knowing someone's sensory preference actually help us with, mind reading?
Well, it's like having a cheat sheet for their communication style. So if you're talking to someone who's really visual,
Oh,
using vivid imagery and metaphors is going to be way more effective than just like laying out a logical argument.
so if I'm talking to my boss, who's always using sports analogies, I should probably brush up on my baseball metaphors then.
Exactly, speaking their language, even if it's a language of senses, it helps you connect with them on a much deeper level. And it makes what you're saying much more persuasive.
This is blowing my mind. I'm already starting to see the people in my life in a whole new light,
Yeah.
and even my own communication style for that matter.
Right. It's amazing what a little self-awareness can do.
It really is.
Okay.
Okay, but we haven't even touched on emotions yet. I mean, that's got to be like a huge part of mind reading, right?
Absolutely. Fexeus actually dedicates a whole chapter to emotions. He argues that they're not just feelings, but also physiological responses that manifest in our bodies, just like thoughts.
Okay.
And the fascinating thing is, we can actually learn to read those physical manifestations, even the really subtle ones.
Wow. So we've talked about reading body language and sensory preferences. But what about those times when someone is really trying hard to hide their emotions? Like when they have a total poker face. Is there a way to pick up on what they're actually feeling even then?
That's when it gets really interesting. Fexeus goes into all these really subtle emotional cues that we can look for. Things like a tiny tightening of the lips, or their eyebrows furrowing for just a second. He calls these micro-expressions, and they can reveal a lot more than you might expect.
Micro expressions, those are those super fast facial expressions that most people don't even see, right?
Exactly. They happen really fast, usually just for a fraction of a second. It's like a subconscious leak of their true emotions, even when they're trying to keep a straight face.
So it's like their face betrays the story their words are trying to tell.
Exactly. It's like in those movies where someone's like, oh, that's interesting, but right before they say it, their eyebrows shoot up in surprise, or like when the music turns ominous. Even though everyone is saying everything is fine.
Okay, yeah. It's like your subconscious picks up on something being off. So how do you even begin to spot something like that when it happens that fast?
Well, you don't need superpowers or anything, just a keen eye and a little bit of practice.
Yeah.
One of the things that Fexeus recommends is to pay attention to inconsistencies. Like if someone's words are positive, but then you see a micro expression of sadness, that's a big red flag.
Oh, okay. So if someone is telling me a story and their words are all happy, but then I see a quick flash of sadness on their face, that's a sign that there's more to the story.
Exactly.
Wow, this is making me want to go back and rewatch all my favorite movies and try to spot all the micro expressions.
You totally should. It's like a whole other level of understanding.
That's so cool. Okay, so we've talked about reading body language
Yeah.
and sensory preferences, and now micro expressions. But Fexeus doesn't stop there, does he? He gets into some even more, I don't know what the word is, mind-bending techniques.
He does. This is where we go from observation to influence. And he introduces this idea of anchors.
Anchors, like what boats use.
Not exactly. These are more like psychological anchors. Think of it like a subconscious trigger that brings up certain emotions or thoughts.
Okay.
Remember Pavlov's dogs?
Vaguely.
They were trained to associate a bell with food.
Right.
Eventually, they would start salivating just from hearing the bell, even if there was no food around.
Yeah, okay.
It's like that. You're creating this conditioned response. But instead of salivating, we're talking about things like emotions and thoughts.
Oh, wow. That's kind of scary when you think about it. So how does that work in real life?
Well, imagine you have a favorite song.
Okay, yeah.
And whenever you hear that song, it just puts you in a good mood.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I have a whole playlist for that.
Exactly. That song has become an anchor for you.
Okay, so how can you use anchors on purpose?
Let's say you have to give a big presentation
Okay.
and you get really nervous beforehand. You could use an anchor.
Oh, okay.
You could choose a simple gesture, like touching your thumb and forefinger together.
Okay.
And every time you do that gesture, you picture yourself giving an amazing presentation.
Okay.
So eventually, that gesture becomes linked to that feeling of confidence.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, Fexeus has a lot of good stuff in the book.
You mentioned something about anchors being used in bad ways, too.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Like how?
Well, he gave this one example about this father
Okay.
who would only hug his kids when they were upset. So he was trying to comfort them, right?
Yeah.
But he ended up accidentally anchoring his hugs to those negative emotions. So even when they were happy, a hug from their dad would trigger those feelings of sadness and distress.
Oh, wow. That's kind of sad.
Yeah.
But you're saying these anchors can be subconscious?
Exactly. That's why it's important to be aware of them. Once you understand how they work, you'll start to see them everywhere. In advertising, in your relationships. And then you have the power to choose how you let those anchors affect you.
Wow, this is really making me think. So we've covered a lot today. Body language, sensory preferences, micro-expressions, anchors. What else does Fexeus talk about?
Well, he also talks about the power of suggestions
Okay.
and how they can be incredibly persuasive, often without us realizing it. Yeah. And one of the most interesting things he talks about is negation. Basically, how telling someone not to do something can actually make them more likely to do it.
Wait, what?
It sounds crazy, but it's true.
So you're saying
Yeah.
if I tell you don't think about a giant pink elephant,
Right.
you're going to think about a giant pink elephant.
Exactly. Our brains are weird. We have to process the concept first before we can negate it.
Hmm. So even though you told me not to think about it,
Right.
I'm already thinking about it.
Okay.
Where do we see this, like, in real life?
It's everywhere. Think about all those advertising slogans like "don't settle for less" or "don't miss out."
Oh, yeah.
Or in politics, when someone is talking about their opponent and they keep saying what they're not doing, it's all about subtly influencing our thinking without us even realizing it.
This is wild.
Eh.
It's like we're being brainwashed by elephants and stuff.
Right.
So how can we protect ourselves from being manipulated like that?
That's the great thing about knowledge. Once
Uh-huh.
you understand how these techniques work,
Yeah.
you can start to see through them. And then you're not just blindly accepting these suggestions, you're in control.
I love that. Knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Okay, so just to wrap things up, we did a deep dive on The Art of Reading Minds by Henrik Fexeus. And it turns out there's a lot more to it than we might think.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book.
We learned about reading body language, understanding sensory preferences,
Right.
and even decoding those super fast micro-expressions.
Right.
Plus, we talked about anchors and how they can be both good and bad.
Yeah, it's all about being aware.
And then finally, we talked about the power of suggestions.
Right. And how to avoid being manipulated.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us today.
It was fun.
And for everyone listening, be sure to check out The Art of Reading Minds. If you want to learn more, you won't regret it.
It's a good one.
Until next time, keep those minds sharp, everybody.